In this mini lecture, we'll review evidence-based practices. We'll look at what the law says about implementing evidence-based practices, compare evidence-based and research-based practices, and then dive into the 27 evidence-based practices that have been found for children with autism spectrum disorder. IDEA makes multiple references to research-based interventions. They also discuss the importance of scientifically based instructional practices. One of the IDEA mandates states that professional development for special education and regular education teachers based in these practices is crucial. In addition to this, a statement must be included on all IEPs that discusses related services and special education services being based on peer-reviewed research. Despite this, Congress found that one of the roadblocks in implementing IDEA has been schools applying these research-based, replicable methods in their teaching and learning practices. There's often confusion about the difference between research-based methods and evidence-based methods. Research-based methods are those that are designed with scientific research theory in mind. The program can simply contain elements of research that suggest that they will be effective. Models for testing research-based methods can include a pre- and post-test model or some sort of comparative study that measured the effectiveness of this method. And finally, if this research-based method has been used over time, it may have undergone some form of a controlled study. Many schools and districts use research-based methods and research-based curriculums, but they don't truly understand the definition of research versus evidence-based. In your resource section, I'd like you to watch a video where Dr. Shaywitz describes the difference between research and evidence-based methodologies for children with disabilities. She gives a very clear explanation as she presents to Congress on these two concepts. So how is a practice deemed evidence-based versus simply research-based? Well, first, there needs to be a body of evidence that has been scientifically backed through multiple studies. These results need to be replicated by multiple educators with multiple students in multiple environments. The research methods used to validate an evidence-based practice have to be very specific. First, a randomized control experimental study is known as the gold standard for evidence-based practice. If this is done, only 2 or more studies of a high quality can deem a practice evidence-based. An experimental group is a group that is exposed to an intervention through randomized control, meaning subjects or participants are randomly assigned an intervention or a non-intervention, and the control group receives no exposure to the intervention. What's more common in education is a quasi-experimental design. If a quasi-experimental design of high quality is given, 4 or more research studies can deem a practice evidence-based. The reason that quasi-experimental design is more common in education is because it's often difficult to randomly assign participants to a particular intervention. For example, if a class is already formed and they're being exposed to an intervention, that is not a randomized control study because they were not assigned randomly to a particular intervention as they were already in a class. The next is a single design study, and if this is a high quality study with 5 or more evidence-based studies produced, then this practice can be deemed an evidence-based practice. Some of the quality indicators for studies that you can look for is how participants were selected, how the intervention was implemented, how the outcomes were measured, and finally, the data analysis conducted by the researcher. As of now, there are 27 evidence-based practices for working with students with autism spectrum disorder. There are multiple organizations that can help you learn about these strategies and how to implement them with students in your classroom. These organizations are featured on this slide. Some of these organizations are national, and some are local from Pennsylvania, such as Bataan. There are multiple resources featured on the websites for these organizations, and we'll be visiting them throughout the semester. Throughout the semester, we'll be unpacking these evidence-based practices. You'll engage in activities such as discussion board, debates, and research presentations. You'll also be doing a literature review on one of these topics. Another assignment will include a mini intervention presentation that we will share with your discussion group. And finally, the lectures that will proceed in later modules will present some information on these evidence-based practices. It's my hope that at the end of the semester, you have a full understanding of these evidence-based practices and feel confident in implementing some of them in your classroom.